The classified report landed on Maxwell Thorne's desk at 9:30 on the morning of June 4th, 1940. War Office seal, red ink stamp, most secret. Outside his window, London exhaled smoke from the previous night's air raid. Inside, the numbers on the page read like an execution notice. Dunkirk evacuation complete. 338,226 men rescued. Alive, breathing, home. Thorne turned the page. Equipment losses: 64,000 motor vehicles, 700 tanks, 880 field guns, 11,000 machine guns left behind on French beaches, abandoned on Belgian roads, burning in the wreckage of what had been the British Expeditionary Force. He read the final paragraph twice. Current anti-tank gun inventory for home defence: 167 guns, total, for the entire British Isles. Thorne set down the report, removed his glasses, pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. The telegram had arrived 3 days earlier. Regret to inform you, Lieutenant Hugh Thorne, RAF killed in action over Calais, 26th of May 1940. Stop, further details to follow. Stop. Hugh, 23 years old, Spitfire pilot, his only son. The details had followed. Shot down covering the Dunkirk evacuation. Engine hit. No parachute seen. Body not recovered. Presumed killed. Thorne had built the Empire Chronicle from a failing provincial paper into London's second-largest daily. He'd made fortunes in timber, in shipping, in anything he touched. He'd left Canada with nothing and owned half of Fleet Street by the time he was 40. He could move politicians with an editorial, destroy reputations with a headline, shape public opinion like clay. But he couldn't build the aircraft that might have saved his son. The knock on his office door came at 10:15. "Mr. Thorne, the Prime Minister is here to see you." Winston Churchill filled the doorway like weather. Cigar smoke preceded him. He settled into the leather chair across from Thorne's desk without waiting for an invitation. "Max," Churchill's voice carried the gravel of too many cigars and not enough sleep. "I need you to do something impossible." Thorne said nothing, waited. "I'm making you Minister of Aircraft Production, effective immediately. You have 4 months to double our fighter output. If you can't, we lose the skies. If we lose the skies, the Germans cross the Channel. If they cross the Channel, we lose everything." Outside, a lorry backfired. Both men flinched. Too many bombs, too many nights. "Winston, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm a newspaper man. I know print runs and circulation numbers. I don't know aircraft manufacturing." Churchill leaned forward. The chair creaked. "That's precisely why I need you. Engineers follow specifications. They build what the drawings tell them to build. They wait for approvals, for committees, for proper channels." He paused, drew on the cigar. "Newspaper men meet deadlines. They improvise. They get the morning edition out even when the presses are burning. The aircraft industry isn't a newspaper. No, it's slower, more bureaucratic, more willing to accept failure as inevitable." Churchill stood, walked to the window, looked out at the smoke-stained sky. "I need someone who doesn't know what's impossible, someone who'll find a way because they don't know there isn't one." Thorne picked up the telegram from his desk. Read it again, though he'd memorized every word. Churchill saw the movement. His voice softened. "Hugh wrote to me last month. Did you know that?" Thorne's head snapped up. "He said our hurricanes were outnumbered 5-1 over France. Said the boys were flying worn-out machines against brand-new Messerschmitts. Said if he didn't make it home, someone needed to fix it. Build more, build better, build faster." Churchill turned from the window. "Be that someone, Max. For Hugh, for all the Hughes still flying." Thorne looked at the telegram, at the classified report, at the impossible task. "When do I start?" "You already have." July 16th, 1940. Hitler's headquarters, somewhere in Germany. A directive crossed his desk. Führer Directive Number 16, Operation Sea Lion. Prepare for invasion of England. The intelligence reached London 48 hours later. Thorne sat in the basement war room beneath Whitehall. Maps covered every wall. Pins marked German troop concentrations, 11 divisions, first wave, landing sites between Folkestone and Brighton, over 1,500 transport barges assembled in Channel ports. The general briefing, the War Cabinet spoke in the flat tone of a man delivering terminal diagnosis. Home Guard strength stands at 1.5 million volunteers, however. He paused, consulted his notes. 739,000 of them possess no rifles whatsoever. We're issuing them pikes. Someone laughed, stopped when they realized he wasn't joking. Pikes. The Secretary of State for War leaned forward. As in medieval pikes? The Prime Minister's directive specified every man must have a weapon, even if only a pike. The factories interpreted this literally. We've ordered 250,000 steel tubes, bayonet blades welded to the ends. Thorne closed his eyes, saw Hugh's face, 23 years old, dead over Calais, defending an army that would come home to fight with sharpened sticks. After the meeting, Churchill found him in the corridor. You think I'm mad, don't you? The pikes. I think you're desperate. We all are. Then prove me wrong. Churchill jabbed the air with his cigar. You think you can do better with your aircraft production mission? Go ahead, but I'm not just talking about Spitfires anymore, Max. The Germans will send paratroopers. They'll drop on our airfields, our factories. Anywhere we build those fighters, you're supposed to be doubling. Those facilities have no protection. None. You want me to build armored vehicles now, on top of aircraft? I want you to improvise. Isn't that what newspaper men do? Churchill walked away. Left Thorne standing in the corridor with impossible piling on top of impossible. That night, Thorne drafted a request to the War Office. Armoured vehicles for factory defence, airfield security. The reply came back in 24 hours. All armour production committed to tank programme, no vehicles available, steel allocation cannot be increased. Thorne stared at the rejection, then picked up the telephone. Get me Duncan MacLeod at Standard Motor Works, Coventry. The factory floor smelled of machine oil and old cigarettes. Duncan MacLeod met Thorne at the gate. 51 years old, Scottish, hands like leather from 30 years building cars. Appreciate you coming up from London, Minister, though I'm not sure what I can do for you. We shut down civilian production last December. Everything's war work now, whatever the government assigns. Thorne followed him through the empty assembly lines. Skeletal car frames hung from chains. Dust covered everything. Through the windows, Coventry sprawled under grey skies. What did you do with your unsold inventory? The civilian models you couldn't sell after war was declared? MacLeod stopped walking. Got about 500 chassis sitting in the back lot. Flying 12 model. Nobody wants touring cars during a war. Show me. They walked through weeds to a fenced yard. Rows of bare chassis sat rusting, wheels, axles, frames, no bodies, no engines installed yet. Just the bones of automobiles that would never be finished. Thorne circled one, kicked the tires, climbed onto the frame, felt it flex under his weight. Can you armour these? MacLeod laughed, stopped when he saw Thorne's face. Armour them, Minister? These are civilian car chassis. They're built for Sunday drives, not combat. Can you put steel plates on them, make them into armoured cars? With what steel? Every ton in Britain is allocated to tanks and aircraft. You'd know that better than anyone. Thorne climbed down, walked the length of the chassis row, 500, sitting unused, rusting. What if we didn't use steel? Not much of it, anyway. Then what? Cardboard? Oak. MacLeod stared at him. Oak planks, behind thin steel plates. Medieval castles used wooden reinforcement behind stone. Same principle. Minister Thorne, with all respect, this is 1940, not 1340. And in 1940 we have no armoured vehicles to defend our aircraft factories, so we improvise. Thorne turned to face him. I need someone who can build the impossible on an impossible deadline. Churchill thinks that's me. I think it might be you. MacLeod looked at the chassis, at Thorne, at the empty factory beyond. You're serious? I'm desperate. Same thing. Dr. Beatrice Wainwright arrived from Cambridge 3 days later, 54 years old, materials science. She'd spent 20 years studying wood density, steel properties, ballistic impacts. Nobody in government had ever listened to her before. She listened to Thorne's proposal, did calculations on a notepad, looked up. 9mm mild steel plate, 76mm oak backing. The steel spreads the impact. The oak absorbs the kinetic energy. In theory, it should stop pistol rounds, maybe rifle fire at extreme range. In theory, we'd need to test it.
How long? Proper ballistic testing, 6 months minimum. You have 6 days, she stared at him. Minister, that's not how science works. It's how war works. We test it, or we don't build it. But we're building something because right now, we have nothing. Captain Evelyn Ashford arrived the next morning, War Office liaison, 36 years old, widow from the previous war. She'd lost her husband at Passchendaele in 1917, knew what nothing looked like.
She examined the first prototype chassis. MacLeod's team had bolted 9mm steel plates to the front and sides. Behind each plate, 3 inches of solid oak plank salvaged from a demolished warehouse. The rear had oak planking only, no steel at all. Where's the roof? Can't spare the steel, MacLeod said. She's open-topped. So every grenade, every mortar fragment falls straight into the crew compartment. Yes, ma'am. Ashford walked around it, measured sight lines, checked the driver's position. Vision? Through slits in the armour, about 3 inches wide. Armament? Single Bren gun, mounted in a slot in the front plate. 2 Lee Enfield rifles for the crew. Engine? 46 horsepower, standard flying 14 motor. She climbed into the driver's seat. The metal creaked. When I was 18, I watched my husband leave for France. He wrote to me about how they'd send men over the top with rifles that jammed. Grenades that didn't explode. They used what they had because nothing was worse than nothing. She climbed out. Test it. If it doesn't kill the crew in the first 5 minutes, build more. The test firing took place on July 29th, an abandoned quarry outside Coventry. Dr. Wainwright supervised, clipboard, stopwatch. Lee Enfield, .303 caliber, range progression, 50, 100, 200 yards. The rifle cracked. At 50 yards, the bullet penetrated steel but stopped in oak. At 100, same result. At 200, it punched through both. Final test, 50 caliber machine gun, 200 yards. The Browning roared, the steel plate disintegrated, the oak behind it exploded into splinters. Silence in the quarry. MacLeod walked to Thorne. Minister, we can't send men into combat in this, it's murder. Thorne stared at the destroyed prototype. Thought about Hugh, about Spitfires outnumbered 5 to 1. Double the oak, 6 inches instead of 3. Add slat armour over the radiator. Heavier means slower. At 3 tons, stopping will be a prayer. Then they pray, but they have something. Dr. Wainwright stepped forward. Minister, this vehicle will not stop armour-piercing rounds. It won't stop heavy machine gun fire. It'll stop paratroopers who've never seen armour before. Thorne's voice came out harder than he intended. It'll make noise, look threatening, and maybe it'll buy us time. The revised prototype passed testing on August 2nd. Barely. 6 inches of oak behind 9mm of steel stopped Lee Enfield rounds at 100 yards. Production began August 5th. MacLeod's workers bolted plates 14 hours a day. Women mostly. The men were in France, or dead in France. Thorne moved a cot into his office at the factory. slept 3 hours, worked 21. On August 15th, the first completed beaverette rolled off the line. Serial number 001. Thorne had named it after his newspaper nickname. It looked absurd. Open-topped, squat, oak planks visible through gaps, the whole thing painted in whatever brown paint remained from civilian production. Captain Ashford inspected it, started the engine. It roared like a wounded animal. She drove it around the factory floor. The brakes squealed. The engine overheated after 10 minutes. She shut it down, climbed out. It's terrible. I know. The vision is almost non-existent. The brakes don't work. Any competent soldier with a rifle could disable it in seconds. I know. She looked at him, at the production line behind where a dozen more were taking shape. How many are you building? As many as I can before someone stops me. She walked around the beaverette one more time, ran her hand along the oak planking. My husband wrote me from the Somme, said they were attacking German machine guns with bayonets because they had no artillery. They died in their thousands, but some reached the German lines, because something, however inadequate, is better than nothing. She stepped back. Build your armoured cars, Minister, and pray they never have to prove themselves. September 7th, 1940. 2 in the morning, the telephone shrieked. Thorne grabbed it. General Headquarters has issued code word Cromwell. Invasion imminent. Every available unit mobilized within 48 hours. The line went dead. Across the country, Home Guard units misunderstood. Thought Cromwell meant invasion happening now. Church bells rang across southern England, the signal that meant German troops had already landed. 3 Guards officers died that night, drove through an unmarked minefield laid in panic, blown apart by British mines on British soil. Thorne walked onto the factory floor. The night shift looked up. We have 48 hours. Get every beaverette that can move to Ashford. I don't care if the paint's wet. If it has wheels and armour, it goes. They worked through the night, through the next day, through the next night. 48 hours later, 103 beaverettes sat in a field outside Ashford. Open-topped, inadequate, armed with light machine guns that wouldn't stop a real tank. But they were there. Thorne stood beside Beverett 001, took out his wallet, found Hugh's photograph. I'm building you an army, son. It's made of oak and scrap metal and prayer. But it's here. The church bells were still ringing. The invasion didn't come. September passed. October, November. The church bells stopped ringing. The beaverettes sat in depot yards and factory gates, engines cold, crews waiting for an enemy that never landed. Maxwell Thorne stood at his ministry window in early December reading the first operational reports. They arrived in manila folders stamped confidential, though there was nothing classified about failure. Camp Aldershot training exercise, Mark 1 beaverette, Serial 037, engine seized after 18 minutes, radiator failure, vehicle abandoned mid-drill, RAF Duxford Airfield Patrol, Mark 1, Serial 052, driver missed drainage ditch due to narrow vision slits, front axle broken, 3 hours extraction with crane, Dover Castle mechanical inspection, Mark 1, Serial 078. Inspector's assessment. Brakes insufficient for vehicle weight. Stopping distance exceeds safe parameters by factor of 3. Recommend immediate withdrawal from service. Thorne filed each report methodically, did not defend them, did not explain, just read and filed and kept building, because the alternative was nothing, and he'd already chosen something over nothing. Duncan MacLeod found him on the factory floor 3 weeks later, night shift. December cold seeping through gaps in the roof where Luftwaffe bombs had torn holes in November. Women welders worked in coats and gloves, sparks falling like snow. Minister, we need to discuss the Mark III. MacLeod pulled canvas tarps off the prototype. The vehicle underneath looked nothing like its predecessors. Shortened chassis, fully enclosed hull with actual roof armor, 9 millimeters of steel overhead, a proper one-man turret mounted centrally, no more open-top death trap, no more exposure. Thorne circled it slowly, ran his hand along the turret ring. 3-man crew, MacLeod explained. Driver, gunner, radio operator. We've fitted radio set number 19, communication capability, twin Vickers K machine guns in the turret. Some units will mount the boy's anti-tank rifle instead. When can production start? That's the problem, steel allocation. This design needs 30% more metal than the Mark I. War Office is already questioning our consumption rates. They want to redirect everything to tank production. Churchill tank program is behind schedule. Thorne looked at MacLeod, at the prototype, at the factory floor where 200 workers waited for direction. Start production tomorrow. Minister, without authorization. We have authorization. Churchill told me to improvise. I'm improvising. If someone wants to stop us, they can come here and explain to these workers why we're building nothing instead of something. MacLeod hesitated, then nodded. There's one more thing. Design element I want approval for. What? The turret ring. I've oversized it. The Americans are developing a 37mm anti-tank gun. If we make the ring large enough now, we could retrofit later, but it adds weight, complexity, cost. You're designing for a weapon we don't have yet.
Yes. That's either brilliant or insane. Probably both, sir. Thorne smiled. First time in months. Build it. If the war lasts long enough for that gun to arrive, we'll be ready. If not, at least someone tried to think beyond next week. Mark III production began December 15th, 1940. By year's end, Standard Motor Works had delivered 2,250 beaverettes. Mark I's, II's, and the first batch of 3's. More than any other British armoured vehicle that year. Also the worst. But Thorne had stopped caring about worst. He cared about exists, and 2,250 vehicles existed that hadn't existed before. The newsreel cameras arrived in mid-January 1941. Ministry of Information Directive, morale footage for cinema distribution, show the British public their island had teeth, make the Germans think twice about invasion mathematics. They filmed at RAF Duxford on a clear winter morning, 50 beaverettes arranged in parade formation across the airfield, mix of models, mostly Mark I's and II's, only a handful of the newer 3's. But cameras didn't distinguish. They saw armoured vehicles, rows of them, gun barrels, crews at attention. The footage played in every cinema across Britain within a week. British armoured forces guard the homeland, stirring orchestral music. Churchill's voice overlaid. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. What the cameras didn't show, half those beaverettes couldn't run 30 minutes without overheating. The brakes barely functioned. Vision slits so narrow drivers navigated by faith more than sight. But image mattered more than reality. German intelligence obtained the newsreels, analyzed the footage, counted vehicles, estimated British armoured strength, added the numbers to their invasion assessments. Operation Sea Lion had already stalled. The Royal Navy controlled the Channel. The RAF had won the Battle of Britain. The mathematics of amphibious assault didn't favour Germany even without accounting for ground defences. But the beaverette was there, visible, documented, one more variable in an already impossible equation. Thorne watched the newsreel at a London cinema, sat alone in the back, watched his desperate improvisation transformed into propaganda victory. 2 rows ahead, a woman whispered to her companion, "See, we're not helpless. Look at all that armour." Thorne said nothing. Let her believe it. Sometimes the useful lie saves more lives than the useless truth. Major Evelyn Ashford,
promoted from captain in December, visited the factory in February with updated deployment assignments. The Mark III is performing adequately, she reported. Better visibility than previous models. Crews have more confidence with the enclosed design. Complaints are down 40% from last month. What are they still complaining about? The brakes. Always the brakes. The brakes will never be adequate, not for this weight on a civilian chassis. I know they know, everyone knows. She paused, consulted her notes. There's something else. Foreign interest. Thorne looked up. Ireland has inquired about purchasing 30 units, cash payment. They're neutral in the war but terrified of German invasion, same as we were. Me. Sell them the Mark III, latest model. If they're going to buy British improvisation, give them the least terrible version. Already arranged, they're designating the Mark IX armoured car in their own inventory. Delivery next month. Anything else? New Zealand. They can't wait for our production. They're building their own variant. Ford truck chassis. Armour plate salvaged from scrapped merchant ships. Same philosophy we used. Same desperate solutions. Thorne almost laughed. We're being copied. Your desperate failure is spreading internationally, Minister. Is that success or catastrophe? Depends whether we win the war. By spring 1941, the Beaverette had settled into operational rhythm. Not frontline combat, not the armoured spearhead anyone envisioned, just presence. RAF regiment units operated Mark IIIs at airfields across southern England, Duxford, West Malling, Biggin Hill, Manston. They patrolled perimeters, checked credentials at gates, responded to security alerts that never materialized into actual threats. The 12th Lancers, re-equipped after losing everything at Dunkirk, used Beaverettes for crew training, teaching men armoured vehicle operations in something that wouldn't be missed when it broke down. Which it did, frequently. The 99th Royal Tank Regiment assigned them to depot security, the 4th and 7th Royal Dragoon Guards to factory protection duty, garrison roles, rear echelon assignments, the military equivalent of guarding supplies while real soldiers fought the war, exactly what they were designed for, even if Thorne had never admitted it aloud. The comparative analysis arrived in April from the War Office Technical Assessment Division. Thorne read it over breakfast, cold toast, weak tea, the luxury of a quiet morning before the day's impossible demands began. Assessment of current British armoured car capabilities, Daimler Dingo Scout Car, 30mm frontal armour, 4-wheel drive, top speed 55 miles per hour, 5 forward gears, 5 reverse, crew of 2, production 6,600 units by war's end, Humber armoured car, 15mm gun in powered turret, proper armour plate throughout, top speed 45 miles per hour, crew of 3 with actual protection, production 5,400 units. Beaverette Mark III, 9mm steel plus oak backing, top speed 24 miles per hour in optimal conditions, 18 in reality. Brakes that were prayer, not mechanism. Vision through mail slots. Production 2,847 units across all marks. The report's conclusion was clinical. The Beaverette fills no role that existing vehicles do not fill better. Recommend production cease immediately and resources redirect to proven designs. Thorne set down the report, walked to the production floor. A woman was welding brackets to a Mark V prototype, the latest iteration, another attempt to make the unmakeable work. They'd increased front armour to 12mm, redesigned the glacis plate for marginally better driver visibility, added folding panels to protect the rear, still inadequate, just measurably less inadequate than before. The welder looked up when Thorne approached, late 20s, wedding ring on her left hand. Minister, didn't expect you down here this early. What do you think of the Beaverette? Thorne asked. Honest assessment. She lifted her face shield, considered the question. Honestly, it's barely adequate. My brother commands a Matilda, tells me stories about real armour, real protection. This? She tapped the steel plate. This is hope welded to prayer. Then why keep building them? Because you told us to, and because hope welded to prayer is better than surrender welded to nothing. She lowered the shield, resumed work. Someone has to build something, might as well be us. Production continued. The foreign orders expanded through summer. New Zealand completed their first batch, 208 units of what they called the Bob Semple tank, after their Minister of Public Works. Built on Ford truck chassis with armour salvaged from merchant ships, even worse than the Beaverette by most measures. But it existed, and in New Zealand in 1941, existence was victory. Ireland took delivery of their 30 Mark IIIs in July, painted them different colours, designated them Mark IX, operated them for coastal defence and depot security. They would keep those vehicles running until 1965, 22 years after purchase, longest operational career of any Beaverette variant. In a country that never fired a shot in the war, Thorne received reports on the Irish deployment. The New Zealand production numbers, requests for technical specifications from other Commonwealth nations. His desperate failure was being studied, replicated, improved upon. He didn't know whether to laugh or resign, settled for continuing. August brought the Mark V into full production, the final evolution of a design that had never been good enough. 12mm frontal armour, improved glacis plate angles, better driver visibility, though better meant seeing through slightly wider slits instead of narrow ones. Enhanced engine cooling, marginally more reliable brakes. It was still a civilian car chassis trying to be a military vehicle. Still oak planks pretending to be armour. Still 46 horsepower, straining under 3 tons of improvisation. But it was the best version of inadequate they could build. MacLeod supervised the first production run personally, walked the line with Thorne, checking each weld, each plate, each assembly. "We've come a long way from bolting scrap metal to unsold chassis," MacLeod said. "Have we, or have we just gotten better at disguising desperation? Does it matter if disguised desperation saves lives?" Thorne watched workers install the turret on Mark V, number 001. Precision work, professional assembly, nothing like the frantic construction of summer 1940. "No," he said finally.
I suppose it doesn't matter. Results matter. Everything else is just how we got there. The end came quietly. November 1942. No dramatic announcement. No final ceremony, just a memo from the War Office redirecting standard motorworks to other production. Aircraft components, tank parts, actual weapons for actual combat. The Beaverette program was complete. Total production:
2,847 vehicles across 5 marks. Total cost, £800,000 sterling. Total steel consumption, 4,000 tons. Total combat effectiveness, untested. Total strategic value, incalculable. Thorne received the closure memo at his ministry office. Read it twice, filed it with all the others. The factory floor would convert to new work within a week. The workers would build different things. The chassis would stop arriving, the steel would go elsewhere. And the Beaverettes would disperse to their garrison assignments, airfield patrols, factory gates, training exercises, waiting for combat that would never come. He took out Hugh's photograph, looked at his son's face. 23 years old, forever. "I built them," he said to the photograph, to the empty office, to himself. 2,847, they're terrible, inadequate, everything the reports say they are. He paused. But they're there. And there has to count for something. The photograph didn't answer. Outside London continued. Bombs fell occasionally. Life continued mostly. The war ground on toward uncertain conclusions. Inside, Maxwell Thorne sat with his son's memory and waited for what he couldn't say. Vindication, perhaps, or just proof that desperate improvisation mattered. Winter settled over Britain. 1942 became 1943. The Beaverettes sat at their posts, engines idling on cold nights, crews bored and grateful for boredom, nothing happening because nothing was the best possible outcome. At RAF West Marling in Kent, Beaverette serial number 1847 conducted routine patrols, night after night, week after week, month after month. Mark III, enclosed hull, twin Vickers K guns in the turret, radio set number 19, crew of 2 on this particular night because the radio operator was sick. Corporal Nigel Hargrove drove. Private Alistair Flynn manned the guns. 24 and 22 years old, respectively. 3 years of service, nearly 3 years of nothing happening. They expected April 16th, 1943 to be exactly the same. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. The Mark III idled roughly at the edge of the main runway, engine coughing, oil smell mixing with night air that tasted of rain. Flynn cleaned the Vickers for the 3rd time that shift. Hargrove watched the runway through vision slits that showed him a mail slot view of darkness. "How long till end of patrol?" Flynn asked. 5 more hours. Christ, nothing ever happens here. That's the idea. Flynn reassembled the Vickers. Hargrove shifted in the driver's seat, trying to find a position that didn't make his back ache. The sound came at 2100 3 hours. Single-engine aircraft, low, from the southeast. Both men looked up reflexively. Couldn't see anything through the roof armor, just heard the engine note, wrong note, unfamiliar note. "Friendly?" Flynn asked. "Has to be. Germans don't come this far inland anymore." But Hargrove's hand moved to the gear shift anyway. Some instinct, some training, some recognition that wrong sounds meant wrong things. The engine grew louder, landing lights appeared, and Beaverette serial number 1847 was about to justify every inadequate vehicle that came before it. Everything that happened next would take 6 minutes. 6 minutes that would prove Maxwell Thorne right. 6 minutes that would make history from oak and iron. The aircraft touched down smoothly. Too smoothly. And Corporal Nigel Hargrove realized nothing was about to become something. April 16th, 1943. RAF West Malling, Kent. 2100 hours. Corporal Nigel Hargrove sat in the driver's seat of Beaverette serial number 1847 and tried not to fall asleep. 24 years old, 3 years in the service, 2 years and 11 months of absolutely nothing happening. The Mark III Beaverette idled roughly, engine coughing, the smell of oil and petrol mixing with night air that tasted of rain. Beside him, Private Alistair Flynn cleaned the twin Vickers K machine guns for the 3rd time that shift. 22 years old, gunner, bored enough to disassemble weapons that didn't need it. "How long's this patrol?" Flynn asked. "Till 0200, another 5 hours. Christ, nothing ever happens here." That's the idea. West Malling sat 12 miles from the coast, fighter station, Spitfires and Typhoons, active operations against German bomber raids and fighter sweeps. The kind of place that should see action, just never the kind that involved a Beaverette. Hargrove looked through the vision slit. Narrow rectangle, 3 inches wide. He could see the main runway, part of it, the control tower as a dark shape against darker sky, the perimeter fence, not much else. The Beaverette's vision slits were exactly as bad as the training manual warned, like looking at the world through a mail slot. At night, in blackout, it was like looking through a mail slot into a coal mine. "You ever wish we'd gotten assigned to something else?" Flynn said. "Tanks, maybe?" Hargrove thought about it. About 3 years of garrison duty, of patrolling empty airfields, of training exercises where the Beaverette broke down more often than it completed the course. "No," he said finally. "At least nobody's shooting at us." The sound came at 2103, single engine, low, coming from the southeast. Both men looked up. Couldn't see anything through the roof. The Mark III was enclosed, but the roof armor was thin and offered no vision ports upward. "Friendly?" Flynn asked. "Has to be. Germans don't come this far inland anymore, not single aircraft." The engine sound grew louder, closer. Then landing lights. Hargrove watched through the vision slit, saw the aircraft approach the runway, wheels down, flaps extended, perfect approach, touched down, smoothly, too smoothly. British pilots coming back from operations didn't land that gently. They were exhausted, shot up, low on fuel. Their landings were controlled crashes. This was textbook. The aircraft taxied toward the control tower. Single-engine fighter. In the darkness, Hargrove couldn't make out details, just the shape, the sound. Wrong sound. British fighters, Spitfires, Hurricanes, Typhoons, had a particular engine note, Rolls-Royce Merlin or Napier Sabre, distinctive, familiar. This sounded different. The aircraft stopped 30 yards from the control tower. The canopy slid back. The pilot stood up in the cockpit, waved, shouted something in German. Hargrove's mind went blank for exactly 1 second. Then training took over. "Flynn, that's a German aircraft." "What?" "German, look at the canopy, the wing shape. That's not a Spitfire." The pilot was still shouting, calling for ground crew. In German, clearly expecting German ground crew, he thought he was at a Luftwaffe airfield. Hargrove slammed the Beaverette into gear. The engine roared. The vehicle lurched forward. "What are you doing?" Flynn grabbed the dashboard, stopping him from taking off again. The Beaverette accelerated, 20 miles per hour, 22, the maximum speed the overloaded chassis could manage. Hargrove aimed for the taxiway, directly into the aircraft's path. The pilot saw them coming, stopped waving. His face changed. Realization, wrong airfield. Hargrove swung the Beaverette across the taxi lane, blocked it completely, slammed the brakes. They barely worked. The vehicle skidded, stopped at an angle. Flynn was already moving, threw open the side door, jumped out, ran toward the aircraft. The pilot was reaching for something, pistol probably. His hand went to his holster. Flynn grabbed the aircraft's rudder, pushed it hard over. The whole aircraft tilted. The pilot lost balance, grabbed the cockpit rim to steady himself. Hargrove was out of the driver's seat, rifle in hand, 20 yards to the aircraft. 15, 10. "Hands up!" His voice cracked. "Hands up or we shoot!" "Meh." The pilot looked at him, at Flynn hanging onto the rudder, at the Beaverette blocking the taxiway. He raised his hands. Slowly, his face was young, late 20s maybe, Luftwaffe flight suit, officer's insignia. "English?" Hargrove kept the rifle aimed center mass. The pilot nodded. "Little English, yes. Get out, slow. Keep your hands where I can see them." The pilot climbed out of the cockpit. Movements careful, controlled. He dropped to the wing, then to the ground. Flynn patted him down, found the Luger, took it, found maps, code books, radio frequency cards. "Jesus Christ," Flynn breathed. "Hargrove, look at this aircraft." In the darkness, details were hard to see, but the shape was clear now. Radial engine, wide track landing gear. The distinctive profile, Focke-Wulf FW-190, Germany's newest fighter. The one giving RAF pilots nightmares over France. The one they knew almost nothing about, and it had just landed intact at a British airfield. Control tower lights came on, sirens, vehicles approaching. Wing Commander Peter Townsend arrived 90 seconds later, Battle of Britain veteran, squadron commander. He looked at the aircraft, at the pilot, at Hargrove and Flynn and the Beaverette. "What happened?" "Sir, German pilot landed, thought he was at a Luftwaffe field. We blocked his taxi path. He surrendered." Townsend walked around the FW-190, ran his hand along the wing. the engine cowling, the cockpit. Intact, he said quietly. Completely intact. He turned to the German pilot. Your name? Oberfeldwebel Otto Beck. I surrender. I am prisoner of war. How did you mistake this for a German airfield? Beck's English was broken but understandable. Storm, lost formation, radio dead, saw landing lights. Thought Luftwaffe field in France. I am wrong, very wrong. Townsend looked at Hargrove, at the Beaverette. You blocked him with that? Yes, sir. Only vehicle we had on patrol. What is that thing? Beaverette armoured car, sir. Mark III. Townsend stared at it, at the oak planking visible through gaps in the armour, at the twin Vickers guns, at the whole absurd improvised construction. An armoured car made of wood just captured a Focke-Wulf 190. Yes, sir. The sound came at 2109, another engine, another aircraft, same type, FW-190, coming into land, Beck's wingman. Get that Beaverette out of the way.
Townsend shouted. Move it! Hargrove ran for the driver's seat. Flynn was already climbing into the turret. The engine was still running. Hargrove threw it in reverse. The gearbox screamed. The vehicle lurched backward. The second FW-190 touched down. Harder landing than Beck's. The pilot saw the lights, saw Beck standing under guard, saw British uniforms, realized. The FW-190 didn't stop rolling. The pilot pushed throttle, trying to take off again. The engine roared.
The aircraft accelerated. Flynn swung the turret, the twin Vickers tracking the moving target. Fire! Townsend shouted. The guns opened up. Tracer rounds in the darkness. Bright streaks, the sound hammering across the airfield. Bullets walked up the runway, caught the FW-190's wing, the tail, the fuselage, hit the fuel tank. The aircraft swerved, left the runway, nose dug into grass. The tail came up. For a moment it looked like it might flip completely, then fire, orange and yellow. The fuel tank erupted, flames consumed the fuselage, the canopy. The pilot was already out, running, his flight suit smoking. He dropped, rolled, beat at the flames. Ground crew reached him, smothered the fire with blankets, pulled him away from the burning wreckage. Feldwebel Fritz Seidel, Beck's wingman, 26 years old, burns across his hands and neck, alive. Hargrove sat in the driver's seat of Beaverette 1847, watched the FW-190 burn. His hands shook on the steering wheel. Flynn climbed down from the turret. Did that just happen? Yeah. Did we just capture 2 German fighters? 1 captured, 1 destroyed, yeah. They looked at each other, at the burning aircraft, at Beck standing under guard, at the intact FW-190 that intelligence officers were already swarming. Townsend walked over, looked at both of them. Corporal Hargrove, Private Flynn, I'm recommending you both for the Distinguished Conduct Medal. You've just handed us the most valuable intelligence prize of the year. Sir, we were just on patrol. We just blocked the taxiway with an armoured car made of wood and scrap metal against the Luftwaffe's best fighter. Townsend smiled, tired, amazed. The whole affair was over in 6 minutes, and you did it in a vehicle that's supposed to be obsolete. The telegram reached Maxwell Thorne at 0800 the next morning. He was at his desk at the ministry, reading production reports, aircraft deliveries, the normal routine of a war that had become almost bureaucratic in its daily operations. The envelope had priority stamped across it. He opened it without much interest, read the first line, read it again, stood up, sat down, read it a third time. RAF West, Molling reports, capture 2 FW-190 aircraft, stop 1 intact, 1 destroyed, stop, captured by Beaverette. Armoured car, serial, 1847, stop crew, Recommend for honors, stop. Intelligence value incalculable, stop. Thorne walked to his window, looked out at London, at a city that had survived the Blitz, at a nation that had survived 1940 when survival seemed impossible. He thought about oak planks, about scrap metal, about 9mm steel that couldn't stop a rifle round, about 2,847 inadequate vehicles built because inadequate was better than nothing. One of them had just captured the Luftwaffe's most advanced fighter. He took out his wallet, found Hugh's photograph. 23 years old, forever smiling. They did it, son. The oak and scrap we built. It mattered. His voice broke. He cried for the first time since June 1940. 3 years of grief and guilt and desperate improvisation finally finding release. Outside, London continued. Inside, Maxwell Thorne held his son's photograph and wept. Beck's FW-190 was transported to Farnborough within 48 hours. Intelligence officers swarmed it like surgeons over a patient. The BMW 801 radial engine, more powerful than they'd estimated, but vulnerable to attacks from specific angles, the armor protection, better than Spitfire, but with critical gaps near fuel lines. The radio equipment, Luftwaffe frequencies, call signs, tactical communication procedures, the tactical manuals in Beck's cockpit, German fighter formations, attack doctrines, defensive patterns. By the end of May, RAF pilots were being briefed on FW-190 weaknesses, how to exploit the armor gaps, which angles to attack from, what the engine couldn't handle. The intelligence dividend would save British lives over France for the next 2 years. All because a beaverette happened to be on patrol, and 2 soldiers did what they were trained to do. Hargrove and Flynn received their Distinguished Conduct Medals in a ceremony at Westmaling on June 3rd. They stood at attention while a brigadier pinned the medals to their tunics. Cameras flashed. Newsreel footage captured the moment for cinema audiences. Behind them stood Beverett 1847, polished for the occasion, the oak planking cleaned, the twin Vickers gleaming. It looked almost respectable. After the ceremony, Hargrove and Flynn returned to their regular patrol duties. Another 3 nights on airfield watch. Another week of absolutely nothing happening. The beaverette went back to being what it always was. An inadequate vehicle doing an unglamorous job, except now it was an inadequate vehicle that had made history. Ireland retired its last beaverettes in May 1965, 22 years after purchase, longer than any other operator. The vehicles had patrolled Irish coastlines through the emergency years, through the post-war period, through 2 decades of peace they never had to fight for. The final vehicle, Mark III Serial 2418, was driven to a depot outside Dublin, parked among other obsolete equipment. Engine shut down for the last time. Lieutenant Brendan O'Sullivan climbed out. 47 years old, he'd driven beaverettes for 8 years, knew their quirks, their failures, their limitations. "Terrible vehicle," he said to the depot sergeant. "Vision like looking through a keyhole. Brakes that prayed instead of stopped. Engine that overheated if you looked at it wrong." He walked around it one final time, touched the oak planking, the steel plates bolted at odd angles, then saluted. "But it was here, when we had nothing else. It was here." The sergeant returned the salute. They walked away. Left the beaverette to rust quietly among forgotten things. New Zealand's Bob Semple tanks, their own desperate improvisation, even worse than beaverettes, were scrapped in 1944. None survived. The New Zealand-built Oakwood variants lasted until 1967. 3 were preserved in museums. Field Marshal Alan Brooke wrote in his post-war memoirs, "Individual factories could never have held against proper German invasion. The beaverette diverted steel from tank production. On military merits, the program was indefensible." Wow, he was right. Thorne knew it. Everyone who'd worked on the project knew it. But in summer 1940, military merit wasn't the point. Existing was the point. Maxwell Thorne resigned from the ministry in December 1945, returned to the Empire Chronicle, to newspapers, and the work he'd always known. He wrote his memoir in 1947, Oak and Iron. 300 pages about desperate years. One chapter, 22 pages, covered the Beaverette. He ended that chapter. By every technical measure, the Beaverette failed. But in summer 1940, we needed something to exist when nothing existed. It existed. Perhaps that is the only success that mattered. The book sold modestly. History was moving on. People wanted to forget 1940, remember victory instead of desperation. The people who'd made it happen moved on too. Duncan MacLeod received his knighthood in 1946 for industrial service. He returned to Coventry, rebuilt standard motorworks from blitz damage, kept Beaverette serial number 001 in his office until he died in 1967. His grandson found a note tucked inside the vehicle's logbook. "We built something when there was nothing. I'll count that as victory." Major Evelyn Ashford became Brigadier Evelyn Ashford in 1955. First woman to hold that rank in the British Army. She retired in 1962 and spent her remaining years advocating for women in military service. In a 1970 interview, she said, "Maxwell Thorne taught me that adequate solutions delivered immediately beat perfect solutions delivered late. I used that principle for 30 years. Still do." Dr. Beatrice Wainwright won the Royal Medal for Materials Science in 1953. Her research on composite armor, directly inspired by the oak steel sandwich experiments, influenced post-war vehicle development worldwide. She never publicly claimed credit for the Beaverette. Privately, to colleagues, she said, "Sometimes desperate improvisation produces results proper science wouldn't attempt. That's not method, that's luck. But when luck saves lives, I'll take it." Corporal Nigel Hargrove left the service in 1946, became a driving instructor in Sussex, taught teenagers how to handle cars on wet roads, and never mentioned the FW190 unless asked directly. When he did, he'd say, "We were just there, right place, right time. The Beaverette did the rest." Private Alistair Flynn opened a garage in Cornwall in 1948, specialised in agricultural machinery repair. Every April 16th, he'd close the shop, drive to a pub in Kent, meet Hargrove. They'd sit together, drink quietly, never talked about that night, just sat, remembered, then went home. They kept that tradition for 41 years, until Hargrove died in 1984. Flynn went to the pub alone that April, sat at their usual table, raised a glass to an empty chair, then stopped going. Otto Beck spent the war in a Canadian POW camp. Decent treatment, no hardship, returned to Germany in 1947, became a Lufthansa pilot, flew commercial routes for 30 years. In a 1978 interview, a journalist asked about the capture. Beck smiled. "I thought I was landing at a German field. I was catastrophically wrong. The British soldiers who captured me were driving a vehicle that looked like a farm tractor covered in scrap metal. I thought they were maintenance crew." Wrong again. Sometimes being wrong saves your life. I'm grateful for my mistakes. Feldwebel Fritz Seidel recovered from his burns in a British hospital, decided to stay after the war, married an English nurse in 1948, settled in Dover, worked as a mechanic, never flew again but attended air shows religiously. In 1965 at Duxford, he stood in front of Beaverette 1847 on museum display. A guide approached, asked if he needed help. Seidel shook his head. "No, I'm just paying respects to the wooden car that shot me down. Seemed impossible then. Still does, but here we both are, still existing." Maxwell Thorne died in his sleep on March 19, 1959, 77 years old. Heart failure, peaceful. They buried him in Kent on a grey morning. Rain threatened but held off. The headstone went up beside Hughes, father and son reunited after 19 years apart. Maxwell Thorne, 1882 to 1959. Minister, publisher, improviser. The funeral was small. Duncan MacLeod attended, Evelyn Ashford, a few newspaper colleagues, some former ministry staff. No mention of the beaverette in the eulogy, no mention of oak and iron, just a man who'd done impossible things when impossible was required. MacLeod stood at the grave after others left, looked at both headstones, father and son. You built him an army, Max, made of scrap and prayer, but you built it, that counts. He walked away, left them together. The rain started an hour later. Beaverette serial number 1847 sits at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford, today, positioned between a Spitfire and a Hurricane. The aircraft that won the Battle of Britain, the icons everyone remembers. Most visitors photograph the Spitfire. The Hurricane walk past the Beaverette without looking. Just an odd vehicle. Oak planks visible through gaps. Amateur armour, the whole thing painted faded brown. But on April the 16th, 2023, 80 years exactly after the capture, an old man stopped in front of it, 98 years old, former RAF regiment, never served at Westmaling, never crewed a beaverette. But he stood there for 15 minutes, just looking. A museum volunteer approached, young woman, history student. "Can I help you, sir?" The veteran shook his head, leaned on his cane, pointed at the plaque with a trembling hand. Captured 2 Focke-Wulf 190s, April 1943. His voice carried the rasp of 9 decades. "I was at Biggin Hill then. We heard about it. Couldn't believe it. A beaverette. Those things were jokes. Broke down more than they ran. We used to say they were dangerous to their own crews. But this one worked," the volunteer said. "This one was there." He looked at the oak planking. "In 1940 we had nothing, less than nothing. We were waiting for Germans to land on our beaches, and we had nothing to stop them with. So we built this. From scrap, from wood, from desperation." He touched the protective barrier, couldn't quite reach the oak. Everyone said it was useless. They were right, it was useless. But useless things that exist beat perfect things that don't. And on one night, this useless thing did something perfect. He straightened, saluted the beaverette, sharp, precise, the muscle memory of 8 decades, still there. "Thank you for being there. That's all we needed. Something to be there." He walked away slowly. Cane tapping on museum floor, the volunteer watched him go, looked back at the beaverette, at the Spitfire beside it. Both aging relics of desperate years. One flew high and one glory. One crawled through mud and existed. Both saved Britain. She updated the display card that afternoon, added one line at the bottom. "Sometimes being there is enough, and sometimes enough is everything." The beaverette sits at Duxford still, oak and iron, scrap and prayer, waiting to tell its story to anyone who stops long enough to listen. Most don't, but some do, and for those some, the story matters. The story of how Britain built armoured cars from oak planks and scrap metal after Dunkirk. How 2,847 inadequate vehicles existed when nothing else did. How one of them, for 6 minutes on an April night, captured the impossible. That is the story. That is enough.